A minor procedure, one night, and a number that made no sense. I want to start with the line items, because the line items are the part of this story that I think about most, not the number at the bottom of the page, though the number at the bottom was alarming. Enough the line items, because each one of them represents a decision made by a specific person, who sat at a desk in a billing department and typed a number next to a word, knowing the number was false, knowing what the word actually referred to, and submitting it anyway. That is not a system error. That is a choice, repeated, deliberate, and aimed at people who were already sick. My name is Lorraine. I am 73 years old. In September, I had a minor outpatient procedure at Crestview Medical Center, a straightforward endoscopy that my gastroenterologist had scheduled as a precautionary measure following some routine blood work. I stayed one night for observation, which my doctor had recommended as a standard precaution given my age. The procedure was uneventful. I went home the following morning feeling entirely fine. The bill arrived 3 weeks later, $78,412 for one night, for a procedure my doctor had estimated at approximately $5,000. With my coverage, I sat with the number for a moment, the way you sit with something that your brain has received but has not yet fully processed. Then I opened the itemized statement, because I always read itemized statements, a habit formed over 20 years of board work that has saved me from more errors than I can count. The first page was the room and procedure charges, which were inflated but perhaps arguable. The second page was the supply charges. Grandma always said, the fraud is never on the front page. It is always in the details, where they hope you will not look. Absorbent pads, standard, for $110 per unit. 7 units charged. Thermal blanket, Sinkyu's $1,180. Saline solution, standard for bag, $322 per bag for bags charged. Disposable cup, patient hydration, $68. Facial tissue box for $100. To aspirin standard dosage, $47 each. I read the list twice. Then I got out a legal pad and I started writing. Not emotionally, methodically. I wrote each line item, the charged amount, and my best estimate of the actual cost of that item based on 20 years of sitting on a hospital board, a box of and reviewing operational facial budgets. Tissue costs between $1 and $3 wholesale, and for saline bag costs between $1 and $5 depending on volume contracts. A thermal blanket costs between $3 and $8. The markup on each item was not an administrative error. The markup on each item was a number someone had invented. I called the billing department. They told me to pay or they would refer the account to collections. They said the charges were correct. They said this with the confidence of people who had said it many times before to many different patients and had almost always been believed. The administration wall and what it told me about the system. I asked to speak with hospital administration. The billing representative said she could take a message. I said I would prefer to speak with someone directly. She said the billing department handled all account inquiries. I said I was not inquiring about my account. I was raising a concern about the accuracy of the charges that I believed required administrative review. She put me on hold for 6 minutes and returned to tell me that administration would follow up within 5 to 7 business days. Nobody followed up. I called again on day 8. I was told the matter was under review. I was told this again on day 15. On day 22, a letter arrived informing me that my account had been reviewed and the charges confirmed as accurate and that payment was required within 30 days or the account would be sent to collections and legal action might be pursued. Legal action. They threatened legal action against me for a $78,000 bill for a box of tissues and to aspirin. Grandma always said, an institution that will not speak to you directly has something it does not want you to see clearly. The refusal to talk is always information. I want to explain something about my relationship to Crestview Medical Center before I tell you what happened next. I joined the board of directors in 2004 when the hospital was going through a period of operational difficulty and the board was looking for members with financial oversight experience. I had spent a career in non-profit financial management and had the specific skill set they needed. I served continuously for 20 years. I chaired the finance committee for 11 of those years. I had reviewed more Crestview budget documents than anyone currently employed in the building. I had stepped back from active committee work 18 months prior for personal reasons, but I remained a sitting board member. My name was on the governance documents. My contact information was in the board directory. I was, in the formal sense, a director of the institution that had just threatened to sue me for $1,000 blanket. I had not identified myself as a board member. During any of the billing conversations, I had tried to resolve the matter through normal channels, which is what any patient without board access would have been required to do, and I had found those channels closed in exactly the way they would be closed for any ordinary patient who could not afford a lawyer and did not have the energy to fight. I needed to understand that firsthand before I used what I had. Now I understood it, and now I was going to use what I had. I called the board chair, a man named Robert whom I had worked with for 14 years, on a Tuesday evening. I told him I had a matter that needed to be raised at the next board meeting, and that it was urgent enough to warrant a special session if the regular schedule did not accommodate it. He asked me what the matter was. I told him it concerned the hospital's billing practices and that I had personal documentation of a specific case that I believed warranted an immediate internal audit. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would call an emergency session for the following Thursday. The Thursday meeting and what a board member puts on a presentation slide. I prepared the presentation over for days. I am methodical by training and by temperament, and when I prepare something for a board, I prepare it the way I would want to receive it, concise, documented, sequentially organized, with every claim supported by a source and every source identified in the footnotes. I had my own bill as the central exhibit. I had the wholesale cost data for each supply item, sourced from 3 independent medical supply industry references. I had the billing department correspondence dated and complete. I had the legal threat letter. The first slide was a single line, a comparison between what I was charged for a box of facial tissues and what the hospital paid for that box of facial tissues according to the supply contracts I had reviewed. As finance committee chair, the difference was $397 per box for tissues. I let the slide sit on the screen for 15 seconds before I moved to the next one. Grandma always said, give people enough time to feel what a number actually means before you give them the next number. The pause does the work that words cannot. The presentation was 22 slides. It covered my bill in full, the billing department interaction, timeline, the legal threat, the wholesale cost comparison for every itemized supply charge, and a preliminary analysis I had prepared based on publicly available complaint data and 3 years of the hospital's own patient satisfaction surveys, which had contained, in their open-ended response sections, multiple references to billing concerns that had been noted in the survey summaries and not acted upon. The final slide said, I am requesting that the board authorize an immediate independent audit of the hospital's billing practices covering the past 3 years, with particular attention to supply item charges, charge master pricing structures, and the billing department's response protocols for patient disputes. I am also requesting that my account be reviewed by the CFO personally and that any charges found to be inconsistent with actual cost or standard practice be corrected before any collection action is pursued. Robert asked if anyone had questions. There was a silence of the particular kind that happens in a room where everyone present understands that the situation is serious and no one wants to be the first person to speak. Then the board's legal counsel, who had been sitting to one side, said that he thought the audit request was appropriate and that the documentation Lorraine had presented raised concerns that the board had an obligation to investigate. He said it with the careful neutrality of a lawyer who knows which direction the weight is falling. The CEO, who had been invited to observe the meeting as a courtesy, asked if he could respond to the presentation. Robert said yes. The CEO said the billing department operated within standard industry practices, and that individual bill disputes were not typically a matter for board consideration. Robert thanked him for that perspective and called the vote on the audit. It passed unanimously. The CEO's face did not change, but something behind his eyes did, and I noticed it because I have been reading rooms in board meetings for 20 years and I know what a man looks like when he realizes that the thing he has been doing has just become visible to people with the power to act on what they see. The audit, the number, and the arrests that followed. The independent audit firm was engaged within a week. They were given access to 3 years of billing records, the charge master pricing database, supply procurement contracts, and the billing department's dispute resolution logs. They brought a team of 6. They took 11 weeks. The preliminary findings came to Robert and me on a Tuesday morning in a document that was 114 pages long. The executive summary was 2 pages. I read the executive summary first. The way you read the short version when you know the long version is going to take time to absorb, and then I set the document down and looked out the window for a while. The audit had identified $40 million in fraudulent billing across the preceding 3 years, affecting more than 4,000 patient accounts. The methodology was not subtle. The charge master, which is the master list of prices the hospital charges for every supply and service, had been systematically inflated for the supply category starting approximately 38 months prior. The inflation was not random. It tracked a specific pattern. Items that were commonly used, difficult for patients to identify or price independently, and not covered by standard insurance audits, had been marked up by between 300 and 800% above actual cost. The billing department's dispute resolution log showed that patient complaints about these charges had been documented, escalated to the CFO's office, and resolved by confirming the charges as correct. The CFO's office had been aware. Grandma always said, fraud at scale does not happen by accident. It requires a system, a supervisor, and a decision to keep going when the first person complains. The CEO and CFO were placed on administrative leave by the board within 24 hours of the preliminary findings. The audit firm's findings were referred to the State Attorney General's Office and the Federal Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, which has jurisdiction over healthcare fraud when Medicare and Medicaid billing is involved, which in this case it was. Both had billed government programs at the same fraudulent rates. The CEO was arrested 6 weeks after the referral. The CFO was arrested the same week. The charges included healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The federal charges carrying potential sentences of 10 years per count. Both were placed on bail pending trial. Both entered not guilty pleas that their attorneys subsequently walked back over the following months as the evidence the audit had produced became fully clear to everyone involved. They had been doing it for 38 months. to 4,000 patients, $40 million, and it had taken one board member reading her own bill carefully, enough to notice that for $100 is a great deal to charge for a box of tissues. My bill was reviewed by the interim CFO, appointed by the board the week after the arrests, and corrected to $840, reflecting the actual procedure costs minus my insurance coverage. I received a written apology from the board and a corrected statement. The corrected statement was 1 page. The original had been 9. The settlement, the 4,000 patients, and what happened to the money. The civil settlement was reached 14 months after the audit findings. The hospital, under new leadership and operating under a compliance agreement with federal regulators, agreed to a $15 million settlement fund to compensate patients who had been overbilled across the 3-year period. The fund was administered by an independent claims administrator, and patients were notified by mail with documentation of the amounts they had been overcharged and the compensation they were entitled to receive. 4,037 patient accounts were included in the settlement. The individual amounts ranged from a few $100s to cases substantially exceeding mine. Cases where patients had been billed tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent supply charges that they had paid. Some of them having set up payment plans, some having depleted savings, some having gone into medical debt for charges that were simply invented. The claims administrator told the board, in a progress report I attended, that approximately 30% of the affected patients had already had collection actions taken against them before the audit findings emerged. 30%. 1,200 people who had been threatened with collections or sued over fraudulent bills. While the billing department confirmed the charges were correct, Grandma always said, a wrong that has been normalized is not less of a wrong. It is just harder to see until someone stands in the right place and looks directly at it. My settlement allocation was calculated based on the difference between what I was billed and what I should have been billed, plus a proportional share of the punitive component. The amount was meaningful but not large relative to the whole. I had already decided what to do with it before the administrator sent the figure. I donated it in full to a patient advocacy organization that provides free billing review and dispute assistance to patients who cannot afford legal counsel. They have been, by their own reporting, able to use the funds to recover overbilled amounts for more than 200 patients in the year since the donation. I want to be honest about why I made that choice. Not because I am wealthy enough not to need it, though I am comfortable, because the $40 million that had been taken from 4,000 patients had been taken precisely because those patients lacked the access I had. They had not been able to get past the billing department. They had not been able to call the board chair on a Tuesday evening. The money that came back to me from their stolen overcharges felt, in some way I cannot fully articulate, like it should go back toward the problem rather than toward my retirement account. The interim CEO, appointed after the arrests, implemented a billing transparency policy within her first 6 months. All supply charges are now required to include the hospital's actual procurement cost alongside the charged amount, visible on every patient statement. Patients can see the margin. I thought that was elegant. I told her so. She said the idea had come from my presentation slide, the one I let sit on the screen for 15 seconds. The board seat, the tissues, and 20 years that finally made sense. I am still on the board. People have asked me whether I considered resigning after all of this, whether the experience had diminished my faith in the institution. The honest answer is no. Crestview Medical Center is a building full of nurses and physicians and technicians and administrative staff who arrive every morning to do difficult work under real pressure with real Consequences for real people. The fraud was committed by two men in executive positions who had made a series of escalating choices over 38 months. The institution is not the choices of its executives. The institution is the sum of everyone in it. I stay because the work of governance matters. Someone has to sit in those meetings and read the documents and ask the questions that the executives would prefer not to be asked. 20 years ago I joined the board because they needed someone with financial oversight experience. I understood then that the role was about accountability. What I understand now, more clearly than I did then, is what accountability is actually protecting. It is protecting the person who gets a bill for $78,000 and does not know who to call. That is who the board is for. That person, specifically. Grandma always said, power held without purpose is just possession. Power used for people who do not have it is the only kind that earns its seat. The CEO was convicted 14 months after his arrest on 11 counts of healthcare fraud and conspiracy. He received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. The CFO received 6 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution as part of their sentences, amounts that their attorneys acknowledged they could not fully satisfy, which is a consequence of spending 38 months stealing from sick people and apparently not putting the proceeds somewhere accessible. I kept a copy of the original bill, the 9-page one, with the $400 tissues and the $40-7 aspirin. I have it in a folder in my office next to the 1-page corrected version. I take them out occasionally when I am preparing for a board meeting, not as a reminder of what happened to me, but as a reminder of what was happening to everyone else without anyone noticing. The two documents together are the clearest possible explanation of why governance exists. A patient who goes home feeling fine from a minor procedure should not have to become an investigator. They should not have to read 9 pages of fraudulent line items and calculate the wholesale cost of tissues and call a board chair on a Tuesday evening. They should receive an accurate bill and pay it and move on with their lives. That is a basic thing. It is not a complicated expectation, and it should not require 20 years of board experience and the specific lack of being in a position to do something about it. It should just be what hospitals do, because that is what they promised when they opened their doors. Grandma always said, when you are in a position to fix something that would have broken you if you had encountered it without that position, you fix it, not because you are heroic, because you are able, and ability without action is just advantage. And advantage, in the end, is only as good as what you do with it. Thank you for watching. If this story found you today, I want to say this clearly: read your medical bills. All of them. Every line. If something does not make sense, ask. If they tell you it is correct without explanation, ask again. Request the itemized statement if you do not receive one automatically. You are entitled to it. And if the numbers still do not make sense, help you review them and dispute them at no cost.